Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and this is part 4 in my Cadian armor build series. Parts 1, 2, and 3 went all over the fabrication of the individual armor sections, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the finishing, the painting, and most importantly, the weathering. Now, if you look at my armor set at this point, the helmet and the forearm armor, I've started to weather those, but the chest and the shoulder pads, I have not. And that's because I know that this process is going to take a long time, and I don't want to rush it. But I also don't want to push the video out. I want to make sure that this is available for those of you that are building along to get a jump start and see how I'm going to be painting and finishing mine. Now, along with the painting process in this video, I also have stencils available for the shoulder pads. I've got the Cadian gate on one side and the numbers on the other, and these are available over on my templates page, just along with everything else. So you just download those, cut them out, and use them as stencils to paint on top. Now, when it comes to painting props, you guys know me. I love my layers, and layers make the prop. That being said, you don't necessarily have to follow all the steps that I'm doing to get to this point. It's your build, paint it however you like. But if you want to see how I'm painting and weathering mine, I want to show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start by addressing the 3D printed parts using some filler primer. This was applied and left to dry, and then I could start to knock it back using a palm sander. With my sanding process, this is just the first pass to fill in the major lines. Next up, I'm going to thin down some glazing putty with acetone. This mixture is going to be brushed onto the surface using a chip brush, and because I've thinned it down, it's going to be very easy to sand off. But the reason I like going this direction is it gives me a lot more control, so I'm not filling in too many of the details. I affixed a different sanding pad for this application, and I forgot to mention it earlier, but I always wear a respirator when sanding. Another reason I like using the Bondo glaze is because I can see a definite color difference compared to the filler primer. After the initial pass on the glaze is done, I'll then go in with a sanding sponge to help refine it just a little bit more. And before I add another layer of filler primer, I do wash the surface with a damp paper towel. The next few steps are where it really starts to come together, because at this point it's not about the major print lines, it's trying to get that surface as smooth as possible. So I'll progress through those steps once again using the palm sander, the sanding sponge, and then moving on to wet sanding. And this is of course a lot of prep that you don't have to do with foam, but it's also a big disappointment when I see awesome looking costumes, but I can still see print lines. So take that time, refine the surface, and make it look good. For my foam armor pieces, I still need to prep those as well, but before I do that, I definitely want to add my battle damage. So I take all the armor pieces over to my sanding station, and I start to plan out exactly where I want the battle damage to go. Like I've mentioned in past videos, this is an effect that you can definitely overdo. So think about if you were wearing this and you're in battle, where would the damage be and why would it be there? With my damage applied, I can now heat seal my foam, and I'm going to add 2 light layers of Plasti-Dip. And always remember to warm up your Plasti-Dip can in hot water to get a nice smooth finish. For my armor pieces, I'm going to be using some camouflage green. Now there are several different brands that are out there, like the Rust-Oleum brand is sold at Walmart, but I picked up a bunch of Krylon back in the day, and that's what I'm going to be using on mine. So I'm doing a flat black layer of primer, and then I'm adding the camouflage green on top. And this is just the base layer anyway, there's going to be a ton of hand painting in the end. Before I go too far, I want to install the straps that are going to support the shoulder armor. These are going to be made out of some 1-inch nylon, and to help them adhere better, I'm going to be using a hobby knife to score the interior surface. That's going to make sure that the 5-minute epoxy that I'm going to be using has a really good bond. The epoxy can be mixed up and then is applied to the inside of the shoulder. Now notice here that I inserted a small wooden tongue depressor. That's going to give me just enough room for the strap on the jacket to slip through here. And you can see here that once the epoxy has been allowed to fully cure, it's an extremely strong bond. Before I attach the shoulders to the jacket, I do need to use the straps to reassemble the chest armor. With this particular jacket, it has straps at the top and Velcro on the arms, and I'm going to be utilizing both of those to attach my shoulder pads. Now, if you'd like to get the specific jacket that I'm using for mine, I do have links down in the description section that will take you over to Amazon. If you are getting a different type of jacket, you may need to figure out how to attach the shoulder pads for yours, possibly up to the chest armor like I had done on the Colonial Marines armor series. So I've got the strap at the top, and I'm going to attach some industrial Velcro to the inside of the shoulder. That way these shoulder pads aren't going anywhere. To start the painting process on the armor, I'm first going to mix up a wash using some Liquitex Heavy Body Burnt Sienna and Mars Black. The wash is applied with a 1-inch mop brush, and it's doing two things. It's first off tinting the surface to subdue that green, but more importantly it's prepping for additional layers of acrylic to be hand painted on top. With this wash process I'm adding a ton of water to the pigment, but before I allow it to dry completely I'm going in with a damp paper towel and removing a lot of the excess paint. But if you notice I'm dabbing it, I'm not wiping it away. This is going to help give it a more specific texture to the paint, and it's going to look more aged and battle worn. And of course, if you want, you could be done with your armor right here and now. But you know me, and I'm going to be taking it a step further. I'm actually going to be using some Warhammer paints, Castellan and Elysian Green. This is apparently what the cosplayers overseas do, so I figured I'd give it a shot. And if it's good enough for the minis, it should be great for full scale. Now a thing to note is that I'm once again using a mop brush, but I'm not using any water. I'm dabbing the pigment onto the surface, and then I'm feathering it around. I am not trying to completely cover. I'm tinting the shoulder pads in certain areas, and it's going to make a lot more sense when I go back and clean up the stencils later on. And I will say, with the entire armor, I probably used about 2 pots, and that's adding a couple different layers. This initial layer, but then I'll use it to go back and cut in later on. For the highlight layer, just like on a mini, I'm mixing about 50-50 with the new Elysian with the original green. This is just going to give me a slightly lighter value, and in the miniature painting world, we're primarily going to be using this as an edge highlight. And again, I'm not using any water at this point, I'm just using a dry mop brush. But as you can see, I'm just highlighting the edges, adding some overall depth to the armor. After all the armor had been painted, I decided I wanted to soften the edges just a little bit more. So I watered down the mixture and I fed it through the airbrush. And as you can see here, I'm still using it as an edge highlight, more so than overall coverage. Now here's where the magic comes in by using that Castellan green in the beginning. With the airbrush dry, I can now go back in and stipple that original green over top. But because it was the original base color, it looks like it's cutting into the highlight, giving the armor a multi-layered grime buildup look. While I allowed everything to dry, I did spray my straps with some Dirty Down to age them. Moving on to the stencils, like I had mentioned, both of these are available over on my website so you can download them and use them on your costume as well. After the stencil had been cut out, I could use some blue painter's tape to affix it into place. And just like I had done on my Fallout armor, I'm going to be using some Utrecht titanium and a sponge. This is going to allow me to dab the surface with the paint. It allows you to control more of a uniform coverage, but it also minimizes the amount of paint that gets under the stencil because I'm not adding any water. While I allow this to dry, this is also where I can go back with that original green and add any of the deep scratch marks or clean up any edges. With my initial layer dry, I can now go back in with more of that titanium and start to fill it in. But because I didn't paint it completely solid, it automatically has more of that worn look. But I'm going to take it even further and I'm going to use my original green to start adding some chipping. And you can see why it was important that utilizing this as an original background color now comes into play. After I apply all the chipping effects that I like, I'll then use a hairdryer to lock everything in. That'll make sure that once I start scrubbing with a damp paper towel, it's not going to take everything away. This is going to allow me to cut back through some of that top layer and really give it a distressed look. The stencil for the other shoulder is for the regiment number for our group. You of course could pick whatever numbers you would like, and each one has their own unique backstories and heroic deeds. The paint application for this one is exactly the same. I'm going through with a sponge first, and then filling in the numbers once I have the general outline. Now while I'm using the original background color to make it look as though it is chipped, you could also add hairspray or a chipping masking fluid to this, paint on top, and then remove that masking material. But you guys know me throughout these videos, I try to do these projects in the most cost-effective way, knowing that not everybody has the money or access to more of the expensive materials. Breaking away from the hard surface components for a little bit, I'm going to move on to the soft goods. Now of course this jacket is way too clean, so I'm going to be using some Dirty Down aging spray. This spray can be applied to the jacket and the pants, and I usually try to do this outside because it does not smell good. After the spray had dried, I then switched over to some acrylics. This is the same wash that I applied initially to the armor, and I was able to achieve a bunch of different variations with this wash by using some mop brushes and a toothbrush. Before I moved on, I decided to put on the chest and the shoulders just so I could see the whole thing together. This would determine if I need to add more weathering in certain areas, and I will probably be adding a lot more grime once I get all of the armor pieces complete. To attach the forearm and shin armor, I'm going to be using some 1-inch cotton straps. These are cut to approximately 14 inches in length just so I have enough material to work with. I can always trim away the excess in the end. After the ends of the strap have been cauterized, I can then glue them into place using some high-temp hot glue. I might actually go back and sew these just to make sure I don't ever have an issue with them failing. To make these straps adjustable, I'm going to be incorporating some tri-glides. These and parachute clips are both fantastic for costumes. And even though I haven't done it yet, I'll probably end up adding some upholstery foam to the inside of the armor. That way it'll make it more comfortable, but actually friction lock these into place. And while I mentioned it on Instagram, I don't think I mentioned it in any of the YouTube videos. But to go along with the foam armor templates that I did in the second video, I also 3D modeled some forearm and shin guard armor. Now it's time to paint the metallic sections of the armor and work on some battle damage. And to start this, all the metallic parts and emblems are going to be getting a coating of Liquitex Heavy Body Neutral Gray. This is a fairly opaque paint, and I'm not using a lot of water to apply it. And the reason I'm starting off with a gray is because the metallics I'm going to add in the next step are going to appear a lot brighter than just painting the metallics directly on top of the green. Now because this gray paint is fairly opaque, if you do happen to accidentally get it onto the armor, I would recommend to wipe it off as soon as you can. To add that metallic highlight, I'm going to be using some Liquitex brand Heavy Body Iridescent Rich Silver. This is by far one of my favorite metallics, and it's really going to pop when compared to that matte look of the armor. This paint can also be applied to the respirators and other metallic emblems. As of right now, they do look really bright and a great contrast, but I am going to go back and grime these up to match the rest of the armor in the end. I mean, I'm sure the guardsmen are probably polishing these Aquillas on their drop ships going to certain death, but they're just a little too bright and perfect for the look I'm going for. It's now time to start adding chipping and scratches to the armor itself, and I'm going to start by doing some edge wear using the flat side of a filbert brush. This is painted along the very edge of the prop to replicate some wear and tear. And for this process, I'm once again starting off with a base of neutral gray. This is the part of the project where you really need to think about where is that armor getting the most wear. And it's definitely a step that you can overdo. For an example, on this mask, it's going to have more wear and tear on the front versus the sides because of the protection from the respirators and the helmet. Whereas the helmet is going to have a lot more wear and tear on the tops and the sides of it. And there's no really right or wrong, so if you do accidentally add too much, you can easily go back in with a damp paper towel or a wet brush and scrub that paint off. I recommend to play around with different varieties of brushes, like sponges and chip brushes. These are going to allow the paint to be applied in more of an organic way that you're just not going to get with a larger brush. And here you can see I'm stippling it onto the surface, but I'm constantly moving the brush around to get more variety in my application. And again, the whole reason I'm using the neutral gray here is that matte paint is more opaque and it's going to show up a lot better as a base color. Now I can switch over to my iridescent rich silver, and I'm using a very small detail brush. I'm not painting it across all of the chipped edges. I'm picking out certain highlights that are going to be reflected by the cast lighting. I know right now it doesn't look like that much of a change, but I promise you if you're on a convention floor with the giant spotlights or you get out in natural light, these things really pop. Another thing I highly recommend to do when you're starting out is to get yourself some reference images. Pull up pictures of either concept art or actual helmets, or even random bits of metal out on farms. See how that paint reacts to weathering and chipping and utilize that on your prop. And the main thing to remember is just have fun with the process. That's the whole reason that we're doing this. So at this point, we've added some scratches and some battle damage to the helmet, and this is just an example of what I'm going to do to the entire armor set. Looking at the armor at this point, they are looking good, but I think they're still a little too clean. So once all the armor is done, I will go back and add additional dirt and grime into the recesses. So at this point, I've started to weather parts of the armor, but like I had mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a long process and I don't want to rush it. I could even be working and adding little bits here and there leading up to Dragon Con. And that's fine because I want it to look good. I don't want it to look rushed. Now, when it comes to this entire build series, I would recommend, if you're not following me on Instagram, to definitely do that because I'll have additional updates, probably more readily available on there when it comes to adding additional grime to the helmet and all the armor sections, because even with the battle damage and the scarring, it's still a little too clean for me. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.